In this episode of Dil Se, I have decided that it's time for me to talk about living legends in the law. People who have contributed enormously to the development of the law. Those lawyers who have throughout their lives sought to protect civil liberties, sought to protect the secular constitution of India and the secular values of India. Those who have fought against the over-enthusiasm of the executive in the decisions that it takes. Those who believe that authoritarianism by itself, whether it is through dictatorship or elected governments, is something that is unacceptable in the constitutional culture that we have embraced. And we're going to talk to a person who has lived through all these times and who has stood for the right causes over the years, and a person who has been actually associated with me because we work together on several matters. And that person is Dr. Rajiv Dhawan. Thank you very much, Rajiv, for being with me. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Rajiv. Rajiv was actually teaching in England, and where he went as a scholar, and he studied in Cambridge. He got his PhD from London University, I believe. And he taught in several universities there and was a visiting professor in various universities in the United States of America, and I think in Texas and Wisconsin and many other places. He has, if you look at the seminal judgments of the Supreme Court over the years, he was appointed as a senior advocate in 1995, and he went into independent practice in 1992. So if you look at the judgments after 92, 95, you will see whether it is the Babri Masjid case, or it's of late the Aligarh Muslim University case of Article 370, all seminal judgments on minority rights, opposing the imposition of Article 356 in several matters. And he's also fought the famous Mandal case. In fact, he's the one who brought about a huge change and brought about a constitutional amendment by which he said that reservation is necessary, but you can't use reservation to exclude, ultimately, the merits that also must be recognized in the process of getting admissions into universities, into colleges, as well as employment by the state. There's a very interesting thing about Dr. Rajiv Dhawan, that he was appointed by the ICJ to go to various parts of the world to look at issues that he was asked to look at. And he was also a constitutional expert with respect to Iraq. So he has vast experience in the field of international law as well. And he's written about, 18 books, I think, either written or edited. And he must have written about 1,000 columns in newspapers. So here we are, a man who is a living legend. Thank you very much. Rajiv, let me start by asking you, how has your journey been in court?
The court is a very complicated case. It's very inspiring. It's very challenging. You have to convince a large variety of judges. The standards of the judiciary, once very rigorous, are falling, which makes the task of appearing before courts more difficult. The Supreme Court has become 34 judges, unwieldy, takes on too many issues, but still, oddly enough, has the respect of the people, which it lost during the emergency, which came back in a big way due to public interest litigation, lawyers like yourself. But it is in danger of losing this respect if it overarches itself and cannot stand up to the executive and parliament.
But tell me, I think, I just want your opinion on this. Ever since 2014, the polity is being challenged by the government in power, by the government actually taking control over all institutions in this country, which did not happen during the emergency. So in a sense, the danger to the polity today is much greater than it was in the emergency, and therefore the court needs to be a little more proactive than it was at that point in time.
I think that is correct, because we are faced with a challenge in 2025 which we were never faced with before.
Which is that?
An elected dictatorship.
I see.
Fueled by fundamentalism, arbitrariness, capriciousness, discrimination not just against people, but also against various opposition states. Now this goes to the root of what I call the checks and balances of the Constitution. No Constitution can survive if checks and balances are eroded. There is the democratic text of the Constitution. The checks and balances are the executive to parliament, to the people. Election commissions, part of the democratic text of the Constitution. And I believe that these are being eroded. In Nehru's time, this was not the case. He made some disastrous decisions. The imposition of President's rule in 1959. But this did not deter an actual full debate in Parliament. When Nehru made a statement outside Parliament on the 7th Fleet, Parliament told him that, look, you shouldn't have done that. You have to make it on the floor of the House. He apologized. There was a contempt case against him in Madras. He entered appearance and succeeded. So checks and balances were always in place, even to a limited extent, though not so completely during the emergency, even in Mrs. Gandhi's time. She was humbled by Indian democracy.
That's true.
Which is not the case here.
But at that point in time, the judiciary, I think at the level of the High Court, gave some seminal decisions which ultimately became, came to the Supreme Court and then resulted in ADM Jabalpur.
I think that is probably true. Some judgments during the emergency were extremely brave. Take, for example, Krishna Iyer's judgment on the Periyar Ramayana. I can't imagine such a decision in our time. It would be blasphemous. But he made it, and it was accepted.
Just tell the viewers what that decision was and how is that relevant.
See, the Periyar Ramayana is an absolutely different version of the Ramayana and a very critical version. This was banned. The ban came before Justice Krishna Iyer. We're talking of 1976, bang in the middle of the emergency.
Yes.
He goes on to say that freedom of religion and free speech cannot be compromised. And that is the strength of the judiciary to some extent, even during the emergency. As you pointed out quite correctly, 9 high courts decided in favor of preventive detention not being arbitrary.
Correct.
The Supreme Court succumbed.
That's correct. So therefore, when you compare the emergency to today's times, you just mentioned earlier that apart from the emergency where people had lost trust, you think that people have not lost trust?
I think these are different times.
Yes.
During the emergency, there was huge censorship. People were preventively detained. In the famous debate on the 42nd Amendment, there were only 4 people.
But there's no difference from ED coming in to arrest you, for CBI arresting you for no reasons. That's no different. In fact, it's worse if you ask me.
That is what I call the deep state. We are today in the throes of a deep state. And the deep state does not just exist in the 7 northeastern states or Kashmir, where people are eliminated without cause. You did the case of Maqbool Butt, which was clearly a case of judicial murder. But the deep state also exists to support crony capitalism. We don't know all the deals here. Foreign observers tell us that these deals are there, they should be investigated. And the deep state goes well beyond the rule of law, well beyond constitutionalism. You are right in saying the deep state existed then, but perhaps to an even greater extent now.
That is what I was trying to suggest to you. But tell me, having said all that, seeing that most institutions, including the media, which was very strong at that point in time, if you remember, and even at the time when UPA 1 and UPA 2 were in power, the media was exceptionally strong and independent. right? That also has been compromised. And what's the impact of that?
See, UPA 1 and UPA 2 responded to the people through various schemes. They were very people-oriented in a way in which the Congress party today is unfortunately not. This government is not oriented towards the people. It is oriented essentially to giving people freebies and winning electoral contests. Unfortunately, our Prime Minister is largely to blame for this iconization. He is a travel agency in foreign affairs for himself and for the country. All kinds of deals will have to be made in the post-Trump era. These deals are being made. But with him electioneering and with him there at every juncture, on every public occasion saying something or the other, I don't think he has the time for governance. He has only time for his own iconization.
But he says, the economy is doing fabulously. India is, in fact, going to become a Vishwaguru. By 2047, we'll be Viksit Bharat. These are all dreams that he is selling.
2047 abhi dur rast, in that famous phrase.
That's true.
I think this economy would have succeeded without the intervention of the state.
That is true. I also believe that. I've been saying that.
And the economy is progressing well. It has something to do with the people of India.
That's true.
To some extent, monopoly capitalism, and to some extent, capitalism. But the strength of the people of India, which is phenomenal, Kapil.
That's true.
They will go and work, they will create startups, they will be there from morn to night, 7 days a week. It is these people who have really accelerated our economy.
Okay, let's move on to something else, which is that you argued the Babri Masjid case. I think for how many months?
Oh, 3 months at least.
3 months at least.
But I argued it from 1974 onwards.
Correct. And ultimately you were landed with a decision that you've criticized publicly. What are your thoughts on that?
The Babri Masjid was actually an easy case to decide. It was based on title to 1480 square yards.
Okay.
Nothing more, nothing less. It was a title suit. During the course of the argument, Justice Chandrachud, as he then was, asked me, what is your answer to the title suit? I said, why are you asking me? Ask them. He asked them, and they said, belief. And this is writ large across the Babri judgment. See, in 1885...
So title was decided on the basis of belief?
I believe so. Because in 1885, a suit had been decided all the way to the Judicial Commissioner and beyond, that title vested in the Muslims, and only a prescriptive title vested in the Hindus. That was the settled matter. Now, once you have destroyed a mosque, committed trespass into it, on what basis did the Supreme Court in 1994 give the right to belief and the right to pray in that masjid? This was J.S. Verma's, I think, signal failure, a failure that accelerated in Babri 2, which we got then said should go to a larger bench.
Right.
And then in Babri 3, which is that fatal decision.
Right.
Now, Justice Chandrachud tells us that he got some divine inspiration. Well, it was. It was. The sad tragedy is that it was Sangh Parivar and Modi inspiration. And we can't run away from that in the most important case of this century.
And the fact of the matter is that he now explains in his various interactions with the press that what he meant was that, everybody believes in God, so God tells you, to walk the right path, and that's the divine inspiration that he was talking about.
This is, in Romila Thapar's word, in another context, bullshit. Total, complete bullshit. Because the question to him really was, on which he volunteered himself, is that intuitive part of judicial decision making. And the intuitive part of judicial decision making is the most fundamental part, as people like you, in my time with you, have taught me. Take the intuitive part away, and there is no judicial decision making.
Correct. That's true.
The intuitive part was the basis of Chandrachud's judgment in Babri.
And then they celebrated it.
Of course.
You
see, unfortunately...
How do you celebrate a judicial decision?
You don't. Because unfortunately, Chief Justice Chandrachud developed in the course of his later years a psychotic love for publicity. Mm-hmm. This psychotic love has sent a wrong message to all judges in India. Prior to this, judges...
Not anymore, I think. The present
Sorry?
chief, not anymore. I don't think the present Chief Justice is the present Judiciary.
See, set aside the present Chief Justice. The message is that apart from lectures that you deliver or formal occasions, you should not open your mouth. Shekhar Yadav has. Victoria Gauri did.
Yes, sir.
So the message that has gone on is you can indulge in publicity, you will not be condemned for it, and we have no idea as to how many High Court and Supreme Court judges have been appointed on the basis of the Sangh Parivar. We don't know, but it is dangerous.
No, actually, we know. We know, because if you go to the websites of every High Court, and every High Court tells you, the judges themselves tell you that they belong to, they were government pleaders, this, that, and the other. And if you go into the history of those government pleaders, you would find that a lot of them were...
That by itself is not enough. Mm-hmm. You have been an additional Solicitor General. That has no bearing whatsoever on your future career at the bar.
No, that's true. That is true.
And therefore, the fact that they were pleaders just shows...
No, that their background is RSS.
No, the background is not completely known. Now, Chandrachud says that he gave a very positive, or rather negative, account of Shekhar Yadav. Mm-hmm. Why was he appointed?
That's true.
And therefore, we still have to look at the saffron past. Judges like Justice Muralidhar are not appointed. And the collegium system has been compromised in a very big way because of lack of transparency. And that's a huge problem, because the government covertly and overtly makes sure that judges that they don't like are not appointed, and judges they like are.
But that's the judiciary succumbing to the executive then.
Of course. And that is
what's
why
the solution for that?
I think we have to review the appointment of judges. I was part of that decision where the NJAC was declared unconstitutional. This was at the instance of many people, including Fali Nariman. I think Chalameshwar may well have been right. We need a more transparent way of appointing judges. At least with a constitutional authority, we will have more information, more public participation, not this closed system.
No, I agree with you. The problem is if the government comes into the picture and the government, this government has been winning elections one after the other. It's a very powerful executive today, perhaps more powerful than any other executive in the past. Even during the emergency, I don't think Indira Gandhi was as powerful as Modi is today. The reason is that this government has captured all institutions, from the media to the I won't say the judiciary there'll be contempt of court, but he's certainly trying to influence them. Then institution of governors, vice chancellors of universities, the election commission, public service commission. There is no institution that is left.
There is a total capture. That is why in a recent lecture, I said governors have become the hitmen of the central government.
Exactly.
It wasn't this case before.
That's what I mean. It's much worse today than it ever was.
Now they want to control everything. There is even an item in the newspaper that they're trying to take over the Habitat Center and the IIC.
No, the Habitat Center the IIC is the latest one. The Habitat Center is already...
Habitat Center has more or less been dominated by the president, close to the BJP. There was a rumor, I am told, that this candidature has been withdrawn. Nipen Mishra, very close to Modi and in charge of making the temple, has withdrawn his nomination to the Board of Trustees. Gymkhana is in great difficulty.
They've taken over already.
Completely. And therefore there is no institution left, but above all the targeting of the media, of opposition. This is actually worse than preventive detention.
Absolutely. That's what I was trying to suggest when you said that, people still have, confidence in the judiciary. But in this scenario, given the recent judicial judgments that have been rendered by the court, things look extremely despairing as far as I am concerned.
See, Kapil, in 1951, when the Preventive Detention Act was flourishing, the Supreme Court said you must include due process in it. To that extent, preventive detention was controlled.
Yes.
This is worse. This is a situation which is worse. But, I have hope in the Indian people. I still have hope in the judiciary. What the judiciary must realize that it isn't just the big decisions where it upholds or goes against the government. It is little decisions as well. Bail, such an important matter. And the record of the Supreme Court too has been uneven.
That's true.
Take the latest decision on the Allahabadi matter.
Yes.
The fellow has been told, you can't pursue your own profession. You can't exercise free speech. Now this tail under that has come in bail orders, and we know that some judges of the Supreme Court simply don't grant bail. It is in these minute areas of civil liberties that the courts have to be much more careful.
But actually the situation is much worse at the level of the special judges and the level of the district, of the sessions judges. There nobody gets bail. How do you deal with that system?
Well, I don't think that the Supreme Court, who was rebuffed by Shekhar Yadav, or the High Courts have independent disciplinary powers of any great value.
But the High Court has.
The High Court does, but it has, in my research on the Allahabad High Court, has exercised these powers very arbitrarily in the matter of postings, in the matter of promotions. Look, today we have a service jurisprudence, both in respect to judges as well as the bureaucracy, which is huge.
Right,
what does it show to us? A very disgruntled state of affairs in the people who govern us.
That's true. Now, let's move on to something else which you've commented upon publicly, namely the Prime Minister, when Chief Justice Chandrachud was still the Chief Justice during Ganpati, visiting him, and his explanation to that. And I think you made some comment on that. I'd like to tell you to tell.
Both the Prime Minister and Chandrachud are psychotic about publicity. But eventually, Modi maneuvered and outmaneuvered Chandrachud. Chandrachud claims that it was an innocent affair. If innocent, it's unheard of. But the Prime Minister took full advantage of it and has embarrassed the Chief Justice and has embarrassed the judiciary. I just hope that this never takes place ever again.
On 370 again, you saw the court did what it did. What are your comments on that?
See, we've got to understand that India has an asymmetrical system of federalism. In the sixth schedule, 4 states have constitutions within constitutions. Why should it surprise us that J&K has an asymmetrical constitution given by a long process of deliberation, both in the Indian Constituent Assembly and the JK Assembly? What was tragic was the use of the powers under 370. The 7th Amendment of the Constitution says 100 odd articles of the Indian Constitution will not apply to JK.
That's true.
This could only have been removed by the constitutional amended process. By what process of amending power does Article 370 in an executive decision overrule constitutional amendments?
Absolutely, I entirely agree with you.
And the process on the 4th and 5th and later on in August was horrendous. Parliamentary majorities overrode the entire process of 370. Now, Article 3, by which you reorganize states, change their status, requires that you should consult the legislature.
That's right.
But as you pointed out, there were no legislatures.
That's right.
So what happened? Parliament then said, we are the legislatures, we'll consult ourselves.
Yeah, but the issue is that the court did not accept anything that the government said. You see, the court interprets Article 370 in a manner that neither the government interpreted it in that fashion, nor did the petitioners.
That may not be entirely correct, Kapil. They referred to a speech that the government had placed before them by the Sadr Riyasat in 1948, which became an important part of the judgment. Actually, that particular speech or concession made by the Sadr Riyasat was totally irrelevant, but became a part of the building block of the decision.
No, but that's not what the government argued before the court. See, the government's position was that we have the power to amend these provisions. The court said, your interpretation we don't accept. But if you read 370, the president could have amended or abolished 370 at the time when it was put into the constitution, after the constitution came into being. That's what the court ultimately said.
We may be at variance on our interpretation of that particular judgment. The court had to say that it wasn't following the line of the government.
That's correct.
But in actual fact, it did.
No, but not by upholding what they had argued.
To some extent, they accepted the argument, as I said, in this instance of 1948. And they also accepted the more or less ridiculous submission made by government that we will restore statehood. So they went along with the government.
That I never understood, because if Article 3 said, and we said that, look, forget about statehood for a moment. You reduce the status of a state from a state to a union territory, right? We argued that, look, you have to decide that issue, because there is no such example in the past of this having been done. And if you give this power to the center, they can reduce any state to a union territory, right? They chose not to decide that matter.
They didn't fully decide the issue of Article 3 and 4, by which the status was changed. You are right in saying it was unprecedented.
Unprecedented.
You've seen union territories becoming states, but you've never seen a state being dissolved into a union territory.
That's correct. And they said, okay, they will be given statehood because the Solicitor General has come and given a statement. What's the relevance of a statement of a law officer in a matter of constitutional importance?
This is both the government and the court subterfuge, making empty promises, fully knowing that it has to go through the constitutional process.
Okay, let's move on to another area which is a very, very contentious area and very relevant in the context of contemporary India, which is the reservation issue. You've argued the Mandal case, and you've seen the progressive constitutional amendments that have been made, and the recent amendment to the Constitution by increasing the reservation by 10% beyond the 50% to the economic weaker sections of the community. How do you view that?
Since the 1992 case, I must have argued 50 cases on reservation.
That's correct.
The most important of which was Nagraj.
Yes.
In 2006. We realized that the Supreme Court was not going to strike down the constitutional amendment. So we bargained and we said, all right, lay down guidelines for the future.
But explain what Nagaraj stood for.
See, Nagaraj concerned the promotion amendments or promotional reservations for SC and ST.
Correct.
And this matter then came before the Supreme Court. We were a little nervous. We didn't think that constitutional amendments would be struck down in this area. The court has supported reservations, the government supports it. But we asked for guidelines, and guidelines were given on the creamy layer, and equally importantly, in what you have just suggested, which is the 50% rule. It cannot be overridden. And this government has failed, and the various courts, if they uphold this, would have failed if they go beyond the 50% barrier.
But they failed because now they have the other reservation of 10% to the economically weaker sections.
That's right, 10% economic weaker. The various states are demanding reservations to go beyond 50%.
That's correct.
The Supreme Court must draw the Nagraj line.
But they have upheld the constitutional amendment.
Unfortunately so. Unfortunately so.
And Justice Lalitha Force dissented in that judgment.
Yes.
So you think that the upholding of the constitutional amendment is unconstitutional, erroneous judicial decision?
See, I support reservation, though not necessarily quotas in this measure. My dear friend B.D. Sharma, a very respected civil servant and was chairman of the commission.
Subclassification you don't support?
Substratification, I'm not too sure about SC and ST. I think it gives the line open to political maneuvering, favoritism. But we don't have an affirmative action program in this country for normal people to be educated, to be given stipends, to eliminate poverty in those particular areas. We are sold out on quotas. Quotas for the services, quotas for educational institutions. And this quota aspect of affirmative action is unheard of in the world. That is why in his great book, Mark Gallanter and Competing Equalities says, perhaps he should have probed more deeply into affirmative action policies, not quota jurisprudence.
Which is what the United States has,
And that is correct.
But let me give you a very interesting interpretation to this subclassification issue, because it relates directly to politics. Now, if within the scheduled castes or within the backward classes, you find a particular class within the backwards who are the dominant class, and that dominant class is in favor of one political party or another, then the opposition or the government, as the case may be, BJP or other parties in the case may be, will try and curry favor with those classes who don't get the benefit of reservation, and then therefore decide on subclassification and seek to empower them, the result being that they seek the support of the majority within the subclassification to ensure that during elections they vote for them.
See, as far as the other backward classes are concerned, you can go into more backwardness. But today we are dealing with the SC/ST, who are extremely powerful for the purposes of the polls, for the purposes of government patronage. Now, when you admit to substratification of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, what does it mean? You will favor some, you will allocate percentages to some,
that's how
and
you
not
win.
to
That's
others.
how you win support.
This is rank favoritism, and it has opened the doors to political patronage and rank favoritism. It is an unfortunate decision.
But the same thing is happening with other backward classes, Rajiv.
See, as far as the other backward classes are concerned, there is patronage there, but there is a category for more backward classes, which has been there for a long time, which has not been abused, except perhaps in Bihar, and except perhaps in parts of UP, but not in the rest of the country.
Okay, let's move on to something else, and that is that I believe that it's time for us to restructure the Election Commission, because it's my fundamental belief that any appointment of a civil servant or a retired civil servant and they manning the Election Commission is personally unconstitutional. Because the moment you appoint a government servant who has been serving you for the last 10 years, 15 years, and appoint him there, though in the past that has worked, but in the present scenario, this is not working, because the whole process of election is being skewed in favor of a political party.
Kapil, the catchment of who should be appointed is very limited. Who would you go to? Judges, retired politicians, retired governors, retired civil servants? Now, I think that emphasis should be more on the process of selection. The present changes that have been made of government domination, of appointments to the Election Commission, is most unfortunate. We should have broad-based selection.
How do you do that? Because if you say the selection will include the Chief Justice of India, the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, given the fact that in the past Chief Justices of India have not sort of, I didn't want to say anything more, right? So where do you go from there? It comes to
That's quite true. Remember the almost midnight meeting where the nominee of the Chief Justice, Justice Sikri, went to a meeting and, in my view, succumbed. But I think the process is more important.
So then what kind of process should be put in place?
See, before that we have to decide, where is the catchment? Who is it that we really want to appoint?
Not civil servants, that's for certain.
All right. Civil servants are out.
Yes.
They do have a vast experience, there is no doubt about that. Right. But that is diminishing.
Yes.
And maybe we need to get better headhunting.
That's right. That's when you set up a committee comprising of public functionaries, comprising of a government nominee, comprising of a judge or two, comprising of civil society, and you create a catchment of people who are fit for the job.
See, that is why I was emphasizing process. The process of selection has become very important now.
Yes.
Who will be appointed will be a result of this process of selection, where I agree with you that the process of selection has to be extremely widely based.
And then that recommendation should be accepted.
Of course.
Yeah, and like we do, I mean, when I was HRD minister, we would have a committee to appoint the head of a university, and we would set up a committee, and 3 names used to be suggested to the government by that committee, and we were told to pick one of them, which is what we did. So that's the limited. You can't go beyond the 3.
In this particular case, I think you're right in saying that the recommendation, by which I exclude alternative recommendations,
Correct.
should be accepted.
That's right.
And if you have that wide catchment of people from civil societies, from various walks of life, I think that process needs to be improved.
Okay. Now, something I think which is close to my heart, and I know it's close to yours. If you look at the directive principle of state policy, you know that Article 39 says that the economic resources of the community should subserve the common good. And if you look at the trajectory of our economy since 2014, maybe even before that, we find that these resources are now being concentrated in the hands of a few individuals.
See, the directive principles, I believe, over successive governments were in fact accepted. Corporate power was always there, but it didn't interfere in the priorities of the government as far as basic important resources are concerned. Today, the basic resources that we have to deal with, whether it is exploration, mines, minerals, the area of AI, etc., is all being farmed out. We have to once again understand, as Nehru did in his 1956 policy, that certain things cannot be hollowed out, they cannot be bargained out. And in this archaic economy that we have, I call it archaic because it is riddled with corruption and favoritism. We have lost sight of what our basic resources are. Also, we have lost sight of the resources of the people.
That's the most important thing. The other thing is now what we see here is that the corporate sector somehow garners all the resources, and they are the ones who fund the government, fund political parties, not the government, fund political parties. And so naturally this quid pro quo is quite evident.
Of course. It is a cycle of constitutional debasement.
Absolutely.
Because your electoral process is affected, your licensing is affected, and you are giving very, very important contracts to the people whom you know you rely upon and who will ultimately pressurize you.
And we see that in the electoral bonds case.
Of course.
And the fact of the matter is that there's no investigation there. There never will be, I think, till sort of another dispensation comes to power.
They have stopped short in the electoral bonds case of revealing everything. And it was up to the Supreme Court to actually say everything should be revealed. And who, in fact, put up the money? To whom was it going? By whom? In what proportion?
By the dates that were given to the court, it was quite evident. And that's what even Chief Justice Chandrachud said in his judgment, that there's obviously a quid pro quo. So if there's obviously a quid pro quo, then somebody must investigate what that quid pro quo is.
This has to be revealed, it has to be investigated, and that investigation could have been taken further. A mere statement in a Supreme Court judgment is not enough.
Now, Dr. Dhawan is not just a legend of the law, contemporary legend of the law, but he has vast international experience. So I'm going to now start asking you, the movement around the world to the far right. You see the recent elections in Germany. You see what's happening in the United States of America. You see how Israel and Trump together are going to, quote unquote, make Palestinians homeless. And this kind of movement towards the far right. First, your comments on that, and what do you think about the future?
There are at present two movements that are taking place. A movement of money and capital, and a movement of people. Now, what we see in Europe and now in the deportations, the very ugly deportations coming from America, is that they are underlined by blatant racism. The rise of the party in Germany, now in second place, the AfD, is an example of it. I experienced this in long debates and long involvement in race relations in England. That famous speech of Enoch Powell.
Yes, I remember that.
That blood will flow.
Yes.
Nobody said anything. Enoch then had to resign.
Yes.
But it was a harrowing time. I was actually beaten up in Cambridge itself on grounds of racism.
Oh, I see.
And in London.
You were the president of Cambridge.
Of the Cambridge Union.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And you were the observer debate, and you were the individual who won the debate.
Yes, long time ago. These things are best forgotten, as you know from your background career at university. Yes. But anyway, these are things of the past. I saw the racism then. Mm-hmm. It rose dramatically during Margaret Thatcher's reign, and in America, Ronald Reagan.
That's correct.
And this racism has something to do with the flow of people. If the world is going to take a large number of people from different countries, they can't be racist about it. The flow of capital, however, is worse, because we now are moving from not just investment in other countries and monopoly capitalism, but a new imperial capitalism, which is going to change this world.
Where the big corporations of the world are going to control the policies, domestic policies of nations.
They already do. America realizes that its economy is in doldrums, because you've got to realize that the American economy rests on three things. Apart from its magnificent research, the military equipment, which it supplies to the world, aircraft, including Boeing, which is now
the F-35s. Now the F-35s.
That's right. No, that is part of the military state of America.
Right.
Its biggest export.
Right.
Planes and pharmaceuticals.
Right.
That is why, although you disagreed with us, we fought this big campaign against the WTO, supporting Indira Gandhi's amendment in 1971 that patents should not be given a 20-year period of protection. How can you have a monopoly?
But now there is not just 20 years, it's evergreening of patents.
Of course, of course. Of course, I remember I went to CIPLA and its evergreening leader told me, what are we to do? I said, Yusuf, we are helpless. And he jokingly said, I supply 8 tens of generic to America. I can constipate America. And I said, Yusuf, is that all you've got? He said, no. I will supply generic to sub-Saharan Africa.
That's true, he said. Yes, absolutely right.
And so these monopolies within monopolies are even there in the WTO agreement, which we opposed. We tried to rope you in,
Yes, sir.
but at that time you were a little reluctant.
But that's okay. So what do you think, how will it impact India, this movement to the far right? And why did India not speak up when these immigrants were sent in chains to India? Neither the court said anything, nor did the government give an explanation.
Kapil, we have to accept that there is a lot of racism in India. Racism against people. It's
Not
caste.
against our own people.
Against our own people, of course.
No, but these are
and
not.
that is why critical race theorists in America rely on Indian discrimination to show that, look, even in America, it is not just discrimination. It is a deep discrimination against people and what they stand for. Now, here was a clear example of deportation in chains. Are we silent?
Yeah.
Can we not take on the American government?
Why didn't the court do anything about it?
Well, leave the courts. The first protest should have come from the government. When Modi, our traveling salesman for India, had gone at the summons of the White House, he should have said clearly to Trump that this is not the way in which we should deal with this. You can't do it unilaterally. Let us sit down, let us work it out.
But how can he do that? He's gone there and Trump has sort of threatened us, saying that there are going to be tariffs, reciprocal tariffs, and even in the press conference that you saw, Trump didn't mince his words. So how could he stand up and say that, look, you can't do this?
See, every prime minister of a self-respected country can do this. But if you are dependent only on the manner in which Trump's tariffs are going to affect your corporates, then there is something of a lack of courage that is there in your international negotiations.
There's a lack of courage qua China, there's a lack of courage qua Europe, there's a lack of courage qua the US.
Take the UN debate on Ukraine.
Yes, see what we abstained.
Where we abstained.
Yes.
Now, what is Modi doing? Actually, it is Nehru's policy of non-alignment that he is following sub silencio. But Nehru had the guts to tell both Russia and America that they cannot behave in a particular way.
On one vote, you can't say that. On that one vote, he is certainly not following the policy of non-alignment.
No, that I can understand. But Ukraine is a forsaken case.
Absolutely.
And for Modi to pretend that he might be able to adjudicate it is absurd.
There's no question of
See, Russia wants access to the Black Sea. They've always had it. And Trump is going to give it to them.
You're going to have a deal with them.
Absolutely. And he wants the minerals.
Absolutely.
Of
Ukraine. He's signing that agreement, no?
He already
with
has.
Zelensky, yes.
And is in the process of completing it.
That's correct. And that gives security to Europe in a sense. That's what they are saying. That will give security to Europe because America, in a sense, will be present.
You go out of NATO, you go out of WHO, you go out of Kyoto and environment. I think Europe is scared. It's more or less openly stated by the president of the European Commission. They are scared. They will find an answer because Europe is still powerful.
See what's happening. The strongest economy in Europe, Germany, has a rate of growth of 0.3% today. So Europe is scared because they don't have enough markets to sell their products. And that's why we are going through a process of a free trade agreement with Europe as we talk. And Europe has said, you allow us to export wines, you allow us to export liquor, you reduce your tariffs, and all that is going to be very tough. And soon enough, there's going to be an attack on us saying your tariffs, your prohibition to allow agricultural products from the United States and Europe to come to India is not acceptable.
See, you're quite right. In our economic system, there is a supply side and a demand side. The demand side comes from people. The recent budget of Modi's government has done a great deal on the supply side. It has done very little on the demand side, giving some concessions to people.
That's to win elections.
Is to win an election.
That's right.
But it will not generate enough demand in the economy. And Europe and America want to see the demand economy of India so that we buy their goods and services.
But Rajiv, the 80% of the people don't have the capacity to buy things. They're living hand to mouth. 5,000 rupees a month is the average income for 80 crore people.
See, the latest figures are 2% pay taxes, 8% have cars.
That's correct. Absolutely.
But nevertheless, there is a lower middle class market.
But that's 250 million people.
Which is being 250 people is a big chunk of a
Rajiv,
demand market.
They don't have that kind of power in terms of...
The powers are limited,
yes.
But that part of the economy is still being eyed
That's
by
true.
both Europe and America.
That's
and
true.
That is the important issue.
That is true. That is
It's
true.
not just McDonald's.
No, of
it's
course
across the board. They are eyeing these 250 million people.
Yeah, and they, given the situation that we are in, I don't think that we have much leeway to bargain with them on this issue, because we also need their help. Today, we don't know whether we are with Quad, we don't know whether we, are with Russia. As you said, it's in a sense, it's the same non-aligned policy, but we've come to this situation despite the fact that we are overly dependent on the United States. That's what we've been doing all this while.
And to some extent, we don't want to break relations with Russia.
We can't.
And we can't.
We can't.
We are dependent
and we should
on
not. We are dependent on them.
Politically and otherwise.
But see the impact of it. Now, Trump says that, look, because of the balance of trade balance in India's favor, he says, now you buy gas from us and at market prices, when we can get the same thing cheap from Iran, get the same thing cheap from Russia.
See, what he has said by way of threat to the G7 nations, you trade in dollar or you don't trade.
And we've succumbed to that as well.
We have.
Because at one point in time, we said that the BRICS countries, we want a separate currency for the BRICS countries, and today we went back on that.
And as you rightly point out, the major supplier to us of oil could be Iran.
Yes.
And Trump is making sure that G25, G7 is demolished and dismantled. So that connection that had been made in the last 20 to 25 years, creating G7 and G20, which was such a spectacle in Delhi, is now collapsing.
It's absolutely right.
If it hasn't gone altogether.
And we are not leaders of the South at all now. We've lost that leadership. Aligning ourselves with the Quad and with the Western world. Now we are realizing the consequences of that. And we don't know where to go. In fact, our foreign policy, according to me, is in absolute limbo today.
We don't have a foreign policy. We have a policy of deals. So when Modi goes there with his shaking hands, etc., and promoting himself, the deals are made by Jaishankar, the Minister of External Affairs and bureaucrat.
You know more than I do, though.
No, I don't. This is also part of the deep state. You know more about foreign policy than I do, Kapil. But we are in shambles. We are running from one post to another.
So you think that we, as a nation, we are economically, politically, in a very difficult situation?
Difficult, yes. But if I believed that we should lose hope, I would commit suicide.
No question of
There
losing
is
hope.
a large number of vibrant India which is going ahead. That is why lawyers like you, the Supreme Court, the few free agencies we have, some wonderful bureaucrats that we have.
Absolutely.
I think all of them will come together to maybe push us a little further. 2047 is not my deadline. It is an exercise.
2029 is our deadline.
2029 may well be our deadline. Though one has trepidation about that.
So let's end this wonderful conversation by saying, let's look for not Viksit Bharat, but vibrant Bharat.
Of course. The answer is the vibrancy of our people.
That's correct.
Of this the greatest multi-religious, multi-linguistic,
in the world, yes.
multicultural civilization in the world.
Which we need to protect.
This will go down fighting.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being
Okay,
here.
Kapil.
Thanks.